This show is strictly for educational purposes. The opinions expressed on the show are personal to the individuals appearing in the show and not those of Thinking Tree Ecoholics Private Limited. The show is not intended to offend or defame any individual, entity, caste, community, race, or religion, or to denigrate any institution, person, living or dead. Listener discretion is strongly advised.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our talk show, The Thinking Tree, a show where we invite intellectuals and professionals to give their views and opinions on various economic topics and current news. Today, we have a special guest indeed, right from the banking and financial sector, Mr. Abhig Barua, the Chief Economist and Executive Vice President of HDFC Bank. Welcome you, sir, to our talk show.
Thank you.
In today's conversation, we would mainly talk about various banking and finance scenarios related issues with our esteemed guest, Mr. Barua, and ask him about his expert opinion on all those issues. So, beginning with this conversation, the very first question of today's talk show, I would like to ask you, sir, is although the restructuring which is recently announced by RBI has definitely protected the weak borrowers, but the situation might slip for the worse once the restructuring period ends. And in such a scenario, if the government actually decides to set up bad banks, then how could it help? So,
just to put things in context, the bad loans, which are very large as a proportion of lending, roughly about 8% projected to go up all the way up to 12% by the RBI, is likely to be a little lower than that, is not just a product of the pandemic, not just a product of COVID, but we've had a legacy of bad loans, which started appearing on banks' books from 2013 onwards. So the objective is we've tried all kinds of things. The bad bank is really sort of an extreme measure, which allows banks that have a lot of stressed loans on their books to function properly by taking the bad loans off their books and also create a market for these bad loans, which possibly might turn good later. Among people who are interested in, buying stressed assets because they're getting potentially profitable assets at a discount. So basically, the bad bank is doing two things. One is what is broadly referred to as the restructuring function, which is taking the bad loans off the bank's balance sheet. And then there's a portfolio management function. So they are also selling these bad loans onward to investors, financial institutions that might be interested in this. So I think restructuring, as we mentioned it, will only address a part of the very huge problem that we have in the system. So I think a bad bank is a good idea. And if you just look at the international experience, both in Asia and in the West, these have proved to be very useful. Just let me sort of give you an example of an Asian bad bank. In the case of the Korean bad bank, which was used after the Asian financial crisis in the late 1990s, Camco was always taken as an example, as an illustration of how well a bad bank can address the banking system's problem. So we also have the limited point I was trying to make is that we have enough precedent to show that bad banks can be effective. Of course, implementation, etc., are critical, and it remains to be seen how this is taken forward.
Okay, all right. So that's actually a very insightful content from you, sir, because up until now, there's always a talk whether the bad banks are always considered or are drawn parallels with the pandemic. But this problem goes much beyond that and much ahead of it. So yes, of course. So in the context of the next question, which again draws attention to banking credibility, I would like to ask you, since the foundation of the banking lies in trust and credibility, now with more of these banking services coming online, even like loans or catering to new clientele totally, what significance does the cybersecurity have in banking, and how can it be strengthened?
Well, I think it assumes enormous importance in a situation where we are going more and more digital or online in both, transactions, which is regular, payments for products, as well as for things like taking loans or making investments or putting money in deposits. So I think the cyber security threat is a very major threat. And it operates really at three levels and can be handled. I wouldn't say operates and can be handled at three levels. One is, of course, the business of cyber attacks, hacking into systems, etc., for which we need more robust firewalls, various other security measures, etc., to prevent this. And for that, I think a large part of fintech is getting into this domain of financial cyber security, right? The next thing is, of course, a question of information and relative ignorance of the banking consumer, right? So a lot of cyber crimes are committed simply because you are not aware of the fact that you're not expected to share your financial details with someone who calls you and says that I need to renew your KYC details for X payment system. So there is a question. So this is not the bank. I don't think it's a consumer's fault. It is also partly a problem that the financial system has to address by creating more awareness about things like phishing, etc. The fact that the RBI will never send you an email, right, saying that this has happened. So all this needs to be built in. I think the third dimension of this is banks have to become more and more careful about basic data and information housekeeping, right? So data protection within banks, which often involve very simple things, like changing your password regularly, not sharing passwords, ensuring that you are not sending data home to work from home on an unsecured network. All these are very critical. So some of it is very fancy stuff, which I have no idea about, which involves a lot of coding and so forth. That is there. But all I want to emphasize is that it's not just major cyber attacks. It's just a lot of it is more simple cases of fraud, and I think those are now dominant, which can be addressed through better information and awareness about what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, and also banks and financial institutions keeping their records more safe.
Right. That's absolutely true. And I believe that the awareness from both the sides, from the banking sector as well as from the sector which actually requires it, which is the customer base, both of them would definitely play a significant role in accepting all these various awareness programs which are run. Right. So that's very true. Now moving on to another different aspect of banking sector, which is lending. I would ask you this question. Recently, Financial Express wrote an article which was related to private lending. So according to the article, the private banks we have right now had a stronger presence in the unsecured lending space where the credit risk is higher. Now, what they mean by this is that private banks typically lend to employees from private institutions and private sector, and also to self-employed people, and all of whom who have been actually hit harder during the course of COVID-19. Now, how do you think that this is going to affect the lending that is done by the private banks?
Well, if theoretically, yes, there when the pandemic hit us around, the lockdown was formally announced at the end of towards the end of March 2020. We were all concerned about, especially the private banks like ourselves, that what will happen there. And there was an expectation that there would be major layoffs in the private sector. Self-employed professionals who we typically lend to would have a problem. Smaller businesses would have a huge problem, and there would be damage or stress on the unsecured loan portfolio. And as you rightly pointed out, the private banks have a larger proportion of this. What we have been seeing that this has not really happened to the extent that was anticipated, right? So in terms of, you just look at salary accounts or private sector salaries, we really haven't seen either major layoffs or significant pay cuts. I mean, there have been pay cuts. Some of them are being restored now. So I think because of the underlying economy recovering somewhat faster than we had anticipated, I think a lot of the worries that we had regarding collection of servicing of these loans haven't really come to pass. I'm not denying the fact that there is still, a risk in that area. There are certain categories of borrowers who are perhaps not in a position to entirely service the loans. For instance, very small businessmen, etc., who have taken unsecured loans. But I think the problem is much better than we had anticipated. In a pandemic year, the worst crisis to hit us, since the beginning of recorded economic history, perhaps, there's bound to be some strain. So you'll have to look at things relative to what the worst case scenario that was being built in at the end of March or April and how things are today. And from that perspective, I think we are hopeful.
Right. Again, another lending aspect that I would like to cover in this conversation is about the willful defaulters. And again, looking at in another perspective. So recently there was an article in the Hindu, which was the heading of that was placing the public sector banks in the hands of private players is not a panacea for India's banking sector woes. And it basically argued that the rising NPAs are majorly a result of large corporates willfully defaulting and subsequent recovery haircuts. Now, in light of this, what is your opinion on the insolvency and bankruptcy code that we have?
No, let me just look at this entire business of privatization. Let us look at it very clearly. I don't think privatization is a silver bullet that will, cure the banking systems, all of the banking systems ills or problems in one shot. There has been willful default. I would contest the fact that willful default is the predominant. Maybe you could call it willful default, but some of the willful defaulters have got a lot of media attention, and consequently there is an impression that willful default is driven by it. You can have default which is driven by companies taking on loans to carry out activities, particularly large projects, which they're simply not capable of doing, and banks lend to them. So that was and there was a lot of concentration of loans in a few groups, and this is something that a lot of people have commented on. So there are various issues there. So I think privatization without major changes in the governance structure of private banks is not going to get you too far. But if you look at the various other reasons and rationales for privatization, let's take them one by one. Two things that, the NPL concentration or the stress loan concentration is largely in the public sector banks. Now, one hypothesis is that the public sector banks come under extraneous pressure, right? And I hope you know what I'm talking about, in order to lend to entities that shouldn't be lent to, right? So changing the ownership structure handles this problem. And if you think that this problem is big enough, the influence of external forces, and let me not beat about the bush, the influence of politicians, people in government, etc., for loans being given without the adequate due diligence or reason for that loan to be given. So if you want to change the ownership structure, that influence from these entities that I mentioned would naturally go down because they're no longer the largest stakeholder in the bank. Number three, again, I would like to say that there is nothing intrinsic to private sector banks that make them superior to public sector banks. If you see a number of efficiency ratios, etc., there's been a lot of work done it. The myth of the inefficient private sector bank is a myth. Right? On a number of parameters, private and public sector banks are just as good as the private sector banks. But the third issue is that public sector bank managers come under the central vigilance process, right? And that often affects their, risk-taking decisions. So if you are scared that you might have taken a decision to give a loan, which from every perspective seemed like a safe bet, and for some reason, maybe you've given a loan to a company which manufactures trucks. Now, there's been a huge downturn in the economy and truck sales have gone down and your lender is not being able to service the loan. Because there is a central vigilance process, you might come under criminal investigation for this. And as you know, so this makes them very risk averse. So in a situation where you want, good quality credit to flow to the economy, to support growth, to support the recovery, right? You want these hesitations among public sector bank managers to be removed. And so they have to be removed from the central vigilance process. So I think privatization to that extent can help. And so we've looked at the various dimensions of, the privatization argument, where, you find a balance between the various things. You go ahead and privatize. Where you think that, privatization is not going to lead to any improvement in governance standards because you haven't, reworked the governance system in a private bank, then it's not going to work. So it's not privatization itself sounds very fancy. It doesn't solve the problem immediately. So you have to think through each of these issues and see where things are appropriate.
Absolutely. So absolutely. It's actually very quite intelligent thought to not just give privatization or as a term privatization that much consideration, because there are so many other things as well, like you rightly pointed out, the governance itself and the change of ownership and everything. Everything definitely should be accounted of, and only then the holistic view of privatization would come across. Even if we go back to the privatization that had happened, when we talk about on one side now government favors privatization, but lately in the 1969 and 1980s when there was nationalization that happened of various private banks. There were around 20 banks that were privatized. So, nationalized, sorry. So, that actually gave a mixed opinion on the forefront that on one hand, there was a successful nationalization of banks and there were so many things that were benefited out of it. Agriculture sector got a boost and it benefited poor and created jobs, employment. Even banking sector was transformed. And now when we talk about privatization. So again, a little mixed opinion comes in the forefront in front of people. However, like you said, there has to be full time analysis.
Let me just come in on this. I think let's just sort of try and see what the situation really is. Now, yes, the public sector banks have played a major role in reaching credit to areas that were heavily underbanked, and maybe nationalization has helped. But today, in the regulatory system, even private banks like ourselves, HDFC Bank, have certain targets, which are known as the priority sector targets, and a large part of their portfolio has to be lent to these segments like agriculture, like small industries,
Right.
etc. So by privatization of the public sector banks, you are not taking away those functions that the public sector was doing, and which you might think that will, suddenly agriculture will be starved of loans. That is not going to happen, because you have regulations in place by which every private bank has to mandatorily lend to certain segments. But I think ultimately wherever you lend, the banking business is going to be sustainable if this lending is profitable and there is the default rate is low. So just throwing money at the problem, throwing credit at a particular sort of perceived problem is not a good idea. In fact, if you look at the US financial crisis, why did that happen? Because everyone said, politicians said that we need to give cheap credit to whoever comes along. And look what it led to. Yeah. So let's be very careful. And I think some of the problems in the public sector has been because of this push towards just, credit delivery without looking at the sustainability of the credit delivery system or process.
Absolutely. That was actually a very insightful way in which you had given us a lot of points about whatever the current economic scenario is going ahead with the banking and financial sector. There are so many thoughts that come across students who actually read these newspapers, because that is what they are meant to read, specifically to crack these various examinations, competitive examinations. However, to get an unbiased and a very pragmatic opinion about such is of absolute necessity. And I think I'm really thankful to you, sir, today for your exceptional thoughts on these various issues and very frank opinions on all these.
I'm thankful to you, Asabri, and I'd like to say that you guys, I talked about this business of creating awareness, and I think you guys are doing a sterling job of creating awareness, of, putting, say, me in touch with a student who might be appearing for the IES.
Absolutely.
And I think this is a very, very critical function in the financial system. You're perhaps not aware of how much of a contribution you're making. All I'd like to say is that, keep up the good work, expand, do more of this, and, all the best. And please, I'm grateful to you for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. And I would like to say the pleasure is all ours to have such an intellectual personality right on board with us. Thank you so much for your for this conversation and for your valuable time today with us.
Sure,
and we would definitely be very elated and pleasure to be in contact with you and also do such more conversations with you, specifically for bank and financial sector related issues. Thank you so much, sir.
Right.
This was
Thank you.
This was the conversation.